This happened last night, and I'm still shaken up by it. It happened while I was eating dinner and watching TV. The doorbell rang. By the way, I live alone, in a pretty small apartment. I went to the door without hesitation, and I opened it. Stood out there in the hall was a woman in a dress. It wasn't the right season for that kind of get-up. I didn't have a girlfriend at the time, and I was like, hello. One thing put me off, though. She stood there, silent and completely emotionless. I didn't know this woman. She wasn't an acquaintance or an ex or anything. It was very weird. A few silent seconds trudged by, and I took the initiative and asked her, "Hey, what's up?" She replied, but her voice was much too quiet to make out. "Huh?" I said. Before I had a chance to reply, she shot an arm out and grabbed the edge of the door. I was shocked and, to be honest, pretty frightened by this. Out of reflex, I tried to close the door. The woman then stuck her leg against the frame of the door to prevent it from being closed. In stark contrast to her quiet and meek voice, she was displaying tremendous power. Somehow, and I still don't even know how I was able to do it to this day, but I managed to get the door shut and locked. Then, the hammering at the door began, followed by the repeated doorbell pushes. I stood there panicking and unsure of what to do. I felt as if I couldn't move. I'm not completely sure how long it went on for, but finally the banging and the doorbell rings stopped, and all I could hear was the sound of my TV in the lounge. I heard another noise. It was the sound of my heart thumping in my chest. My adrenaline was pumping. After a few moments, I heard the sound of my neighbor's doorbell ringing like crazy, followed by repeated knocks at their door. I was stood there in the same spot, trembling. There was an ear-shattering scream coming from out there in the hall. Then I heard the knocking and the ringing starting up again further down the hall. I guess that woman was now trying the door of my neighbor's neighbor. I listened, out of necessity, yet with fear. And eventually, the racket in the hall stopped. But that night I was so scared I couldn't sleep. Because, I swear at different points during the night, I heard that woman's faint voice, coupled with the sound of fingernails scratching at the door. I still can't get that noise out of my head. The reason for that woman's actions are still a mystery to me, but I will speak with my neighbors to see if they know anything. My guess is that woman was struggling with something, mentally. Either way, I was terrified.
Lately, I've been hearing a voice outside my window late at night. I can only make out a few words. It mutters, "Give it back." Then she calls out a name and asks for this person to give whatever it is back. The voice is definitely female, and it's loud enough to wake me up if I have my window open. I can usually hear this voice between 1 and 3 a.m. and between 1 and 4 times a week. Sometimes it's really loud, and other times it's as loud as the usual street noise. Unless I'm in a deep sleep, I will wake up when I hear it. After about 2 weeks, I feel sleep deprived and not my usual self. The window is close to my bed, and whenever I heard the noise, I looked out there often, but I couldn't ever see anyone. I thought that I could have been hearing things. I even thought that I could have been having bad dreams. But one night, I heard something else react to the voice. There's a pretty crazy dude in my neighborhood. He lives diagonally across from my place, and I heard him shout out a few times for whoever it was to shut up. A few nights later, I was out with a good friend of mine, drinking and heading home pretty drunk. I live just off the main street and down an alleyway. To get to my place, you have to follow the curve of the alleyway, and then you come out in my little neighborhood. As soon as I came out of the alleyway, I saw a woman loitering by my house. She was holding a box under her arm. It was about the size of A5 or A4 paper. I could see papers all bundled up in there. It was her voice that I'd been hearing. She was muttering right in front of my window for someone to give something back to her. I was freaked out by her. That, coupled with being sleep deprived, created a weird cocktail of fear. She wasn't facing me, and I wasn't sure if she realized I was there or not. I used this opportunity to quietly call the police. I hoped that this would be the end of me getting woken up at night so often. 2 officers arrived pretty quickly, and they took away the woman, who went kicking and screaming. She sounded possessed. I got a little scared. I'm a single woman living alone, and I didn't want this crazy person to know that I was the one who called the police. So when the officers took my statement, I said to them I wanted my details to remain anonymous, and for any information they had to retain on me to be kept private. The officer called later to say that the woman was being kept in custody, and for me not to worry. Now here's the scary part of this experience. It was about 2 a.m. when I got a call from the officer. About 5 minutes later, I heard something outside. A female voice was muttering, "Give it back." Then she called out a name and asked for this person to give whatever it is back. Instantly, I was really frightened. But then I thought that I was hearing things. Auditory hallucinations. But when I heard the voice coming from the other side of my front door for the first time, I knew it was real. I stood there, frightened and unable to move. Then the banging started. I backed away from the door and grabbed my phone. I called the officer who had just called me and told me not to worry. I frantically told him that there was someone at the door trying to get in. He came back to search for the would-be intruder and said that he couldn't find anyone in the area. He told me to keep all my doors shut and locked and to try and calm down. I was pretty hysterical at this point. He said he would be back later to patrol the area, just in case. Then, about 10 minutes after he left, I heard that dreadful voice from outside calling for someone to give something back to her. She was so much louder this time. I didn't want to call the cops again, in fear that this could all be in my head. I didn't want to seem crazy. I didn't think I was. It all seemed very real to me. I didn't want to keep filling out reports all night. Confident that the doors were locked and I was safe, I got into bed and tried to ignore the shrill cries of the woman outside. In the morning, I contacted the police and asked about how long the woman would remain in custody, just in case they let her out. They said that since she really didn't settle down until 5 a.m., and because she was being violent, she stayed in the cells that night, and she'd be checked later today. So in other words, the person who came to my door definitely wasn't the person they arrested. Now that I think about it, the voices were similar, but not identical. They had the same kind of raspy, stale, stilted manner and quality to their voice though. I had a meeting at work that morning I had to go to, but I was scared to leave. I pulled myself together and timidly headed out the front door. There were loads of dirty footprints all over the bottom half of my door. It looked as if it had been repeatedly kicked. I guess that was the banging sound. I took some photos and I headed off. When the police came in the evening, I showed them the door and my photos. Once again, when night came, I heard the voice of a woman out there calling for someone to give something back to her. The police told me that they thought there was a group of these suspicious people in the area. They weren't able to provide me with a reason or motive for their actions. That was it for me. I stayed with a friend the following night. The police were watching us that night. They patrolled both outside my home and my friend's home. They didn't find anyone that night, though. After the night I stayed with my friend, the police patrols continued, but I never heard that voice again. Something weird did happen about 3 days later. I got a call on my home phone, and I heard a voice muttering something unintelligible. It was strange. I don't put my number in the phone book. I usually don't answer calls from withheld numbers, anonymous numbers, and that kind of thing. But my niece was staying over that night, and she picked up the phone. When she answered the phone, she said that she heard nothing but silence, and that was when she handed it to me. As soon as I said hello, a voice started muttering something angrily to me. I'm kind of glad I didn't understand or hear what the voice said. I don't need to know what kind of curse or threats were attempted to be spat down the phone at me, because whenever I think about the voice I heard outside, the banging at the door, and the idea that there might be more of these cult-like people who were seemingly intent on harassing me, I get scared. I have racked my brain, and I cannot think of a person, male or female, that I've fallen out with, been in a relationship with, or irritated, who could be capable of doing this. I'm glad it's all over with. I consider it all over with since I haven't had another incident for a while. If anything else happens, I will let you know.
I'm a female, and this happened when I was living alone about 10 years ago. One night after work, I think it was about 9 p.m. or just after, the doorbell rang. I was used to getting the occasional door-to-door salesman calling at the door, but I felt like it was a little too late for that. So I approached the door and I looked through the peephole. There was a man out there. He was in his 20s. I didn't know him, so I asked from behind the door, "Who is it?" "You were peeping. You were peeping, weren't you?" I didn't know what to say. I don't think I said anything, actually. However, I might have just gasped or something. "You were peeping the other day in the public bathhouse, right? If you want to see it that much, you don't need to peep. I'll show you now." "I didn't peep at you. I have no interest in that or you," I replied. I stormed back to my living room, safe in the knowledge that the door was locked. I didn't get another knock at the door, so I assumed that that creep went away. And of course, I hadn't been to any public bathhouse to peep on anyone either. The incident really annoyed me. Nothing really happened after that, and I thought that would be the end of it. But 2 months later, something else happened. I came home at around 11 p.m. I used to have a bicycle back in those days, and I used to live in an apartment on the second floor. And we had an area for our bicycles on the ground floor. The bicycle parking area was a really narrow and dark place. It was pitch black that night in the parking area. You have to walk to the other end of the corridor after parking your bike to get to the stairs to take you up to the apartments. After parking my bike, I looked up and saw a man stood there in the dark by the stairs. He stood there for a while staring at me. I could only see his silhouette, but he was there, and I knew he was looking at me, watching me. After a few seconds, I thought that he had started climbing the stairs to the apartments. I guessed that he was a resident. I then made my way over to the stairs. I was thinking how creepy it would be to run into someone down here in the dark. Those thoughts were dumb because I started to freak myself out. I wanted to get upstairs and back in the light. While these thoughts were swirling around my head, a frightening realization came to me. If he was a resident, why haven't I heard the sound of keys or a door opening and closing yet? I really didn't need this. I was so tired from putting in some overtime at work, and I wanted nothing more than to just get home. I decided to push on and keep going. I started climbing the stairs. I was nervous, but I really wanted to get out of the bicycle parking area. The stairs were in the shape of a U, so you cannot see the top of the stairs until you round the corner in the middle. I was dreading rounding that corner, but I thought that it was just my tired brain conjuring up creepy thoughts. I told myself to keep going. I rounded the corner and saw a man at the top of the stairs. My fears were confirmed. I nearly screamed. It was the guy who accused me of peeping a couple of months back. I'd never forget his face. I was panicking. I had to get past this guy to my apartment. I decided to just try and play it cool. I pretended like I didn't know him or recognize him and that I wasn't scared of him. I walked towards him. He said, "Good evening." I replied with a good evening of my own. I don't know how I managed to disguise the fear in my voice, but I did. I calmly walked to my apartment while rooting around in my bag for my keys. I tried to unlock the door, but I was so nervous that it took me 3 attempts to get the door open. When I finally got inside, I hurriedly locked the door behind me. After about 5 minutes, I wanted to see if this guy was still out there, so I grabbed an umbrella as a weapon. I did this because I wanted to eliminate the fear that was instilled in me by that creep. I didn't want to let it rule me. I was going to carry on coming and going from my apartment as I pleased. When I opened the door, the weirdo was already gone. I was kind of glad he was gone, to be honest. I don't know what might have happened. I was feeling brave and the adrenaline was flowing through me, but it was probably a bad idea to have gone out there. A few days later, something else happened. This is dumb and I don't advise anyone else to do this, but I used to keep my spare key in my mailbox. I was checking my mail as usual, after work, and I realized that the key was missing. I immediately remembered that creep and called for someone to come and change the locks on my door. Thankfully, nothing else happened, but you know, when you're sound asleep in bed and you hear a sound. I thought on a handful of occasions that my door was being tried. I still think about how bad things could have been for me if I didn't change the locks.
This happened about a month and a half ago. It's not a ghost story or anything, but hear me out. I heard my doorbell ring in the middle of the night. I woke up startled. Checking the time, it was around 3:30 and pitch black in my apartment. My apartment is a pretty small studio apartment. I wondered what the hell was going on, so I got up without turning on the lights, slowly approached the door and put my eye to the peephole. Worried. What I saw when I looked through the peephole was a man I presumed to be in his 40s. I'm a male, I live alone, and this guy was older than me and a complete stranger. He stood there, facing my door, and he was wearing a suit. We sometimes get these people checking if we have TV licenses or doing door-to-door sales, but never this late. There was something wrong here. Yes? I called out. I didn't want to open the door without knowing why he was in front of my door at 3:30 a.m. I watched, and he seemed to either not hear me or was in some sort of trance-like state because he didn't move or react in the slightest. I started to feel creeped out. My mind was attempting to create logic and piece together reasons for this late-night visit, but it was grasping at straws. There was no good reason why he was here, let alone saying nothing. I slowly backed away from the door into the darkness of my apartment. I jumped out of my skin when I heard the doorbell ring again. I grabbed my phone and called the police from my bedroom. I told them that there was a stranger at the door and to please come quickly. I backed myself as far away as I could from my door and just listened in silence. It was quiet out there. My bell hadn't rung again since the time I called the police. About 10 minutes or so, and I heard a knock at the door, and a voice announced that they were the police. I checked through the people, and I saw 2 officers out there. One officer took my statement, and the other was knocking on my neighbor across the hall's door. I thought to myself, why are they doing that? I must admit, I did kind of feel relieved to see someone I knew. I was still shaken up, but I think he looked more relieved than I did. My neighbor across the hall is a 20-year-old office worker like me. He said that he heard my doorbell and it woke him up. In our building, you can pretty much hear when anyone's doorbell rings. It's a pretty old building. He told the police that he heard my voice while lying in bed, and he got up to see what was happening out here. When he heard my doorbell for the second time, he did what I did and approached the peephole with the lights off and saw the person who was out there. He said that he thought the man was hiding some kind of object up his coat sleeve. I dread to think what it could have been. A weapon, maybe. The strange man put his eye to my peephole several times, in what I can only assume was an attempt to look inside my apartment. My neighbor watched him do this for a while, and then suddenly the man in the hallway turned to face his door. He said it felt like he'd been spotted. He was so creeped out by that, he called the police, and I'm grateful he did. He probably helped bump this incident up their priority list. Like I said at the start, this happened a month and a half ago. My neighbor pretty much instantly moved out of our building. Unfortunately, I don't have the money to do that. I am still living here. Thankfully, nothing else has happened yet. I don't think he purposely selected me that night. I just think he was out there trying apartments to see if he could get into any. He was just a weirdo passing by. What really frightened me about the incident, though, was the silence. There was no attempt to persuade me to open the door, no lies to convince me. It was just cold, harsh quietness. Perhaps he was attempting to play on my curiosity or sense of decency, or maybe he just didn't want to make any noise out there, where the neighbors could have heard. You can tell that I've been thinking about this a lot. I hope I never see him again. I don't want my questions answered. I believe that his intentions were sinister.
This happened when I was living alone, while I was studying at university. Back then I was living in a typical 2-story apartment block, which was specifically leased to students. These were single-person apartments. The building was pretty old. I remember not having the best opinion of the place when I was shown it by the realtor. It was my fault. I left the apartment hunt till the last minute, and all the good places were taken. I asked my dad to come along with me to size up the place and offer any advice. We seemed pretty satisfied that that apartment was probably the best I was going to get. So I took it. It was a corner room on the second floor which faced the road. It was tough at the start, being in a new and unusual place, living alone in the city, you know. I struggled during that first month, but when that month was over, things got a little easier. I settled in, and I started to feel more relaxed. One night I rode my bike back to my building from university. I was heading back to my apartment, down the communal hallway. As I was walking, I heard a huge bang coming from the apartment at the end of the hall. It came from the apartment opposite mine. I wondered what was happening in there, so I lingered in the hall and slowly approached the door. I heard 2 loud bangs. It honestly sounded like someone was throwing their entire body weight against that door. I watched as the door handle rattled with the force. I was confused and still curious, so I watched, wondering what the hell was going on in there. And then I heard a voice call out from behind the door. "Hey, is someone out there? This door won't open, please open it for me." It was a low and frustrated male voice. Thinking back on it, I probably should have just opened the door. I should have just helped out, but I didn't. I called out to the person behind the door. What happened? Goddamn door won't open. Is there anything you could do from out there to help me out? I looked at the door, and I couldn't see any reason why a door which opened inward would be prevented from opening on the inside. The door handle looked normal and not tampered with. If there was someone in there, I assumed that it wasn't an issue with the key. I didn't understand why they were trapped in there. I can't see anything wrong with the door, to be honest with you. Well, that's bullshit, because the fucking door would open if that was the case. Ha! Open the door! The guy in there started rattling the door handle like crazy and banging on the door. He would do this while I was attempting to reply to him. You're probably thinking, why don't you just open the door? Clearly someone is struggling in there and they're getting agitated. There was one clear reason why I didn't open that door, and that was because I knew for a fact that no one lived in there. I was pretty much the last person to reserve an apartment before school started, and we were about a month and a half into our courses when this happened. I remember speaking to the realtor and even seeing the apartment. I didn't like it because I felt like I would get too much sunlight in that room. It would have been a nightmare in summer. Also another reason, I was alone in that hallway and I was a teenage woman. The guy on the other side sounded so much older than me and so much more pissed off than me. I didn't understand why I had to be the one to open the door for him either, and it seemed like it could be some kind of trap. Another final reason is because every time I pass my apartment block, I can see into that apartment. And there was never a light on in there, and the curtains were left open, revealing an empty apartment. There was no furniture or anything in there. It was seriously weird. While I was thinking of this, the guy behind the door was getting angrier and angrier. He was demanding me to open the door, and this definitely felt wrong. I didn't know what to do, so I just got out of there. I didn't want to go to my apartment with that going on. I spent the night in a 24-hour family restaurant. In the end, I managed to persuade my dad to help me with my finances to move out. I still wonder about that place. A thief wouldn't break into an empty room. I wonder what the guy behind the door's intentions were. I really wonder about what might have happened to me if I opened the door. I don't know if that apartment has some kind of history to it, but if it does, I don't want to know what happened there. I guess that ignorance is bliss. I'm happy with my choice. You don't always have to open the door to a stranger.